when we go through any kind of tragedy, whether it is personal in our life or whether it's something that is more of as a nation, as a people group, we immediately are triggered into certain responses. And those responses have been kind of wired into us based on our experiences, how we grew up, the different things that we wrestled with. But one of the most, I think, beautiful things about the scriptures is that the scriptures don't leave us hanging. The scriptures don't leave us hopeless. And the scriptures are so real and visceral, and it doesn't patty cake around things, but it says, here's the reality of life, and here's what it looks like for God to be in you and with you through this. So we're going to look at a psalm that I believe really teaches us as the people of God how to lament. So when we experience tragedy in any form, if we're not careful, there are typically two responses that we make towards it. The first response is what's called toxic positivity. And this happens when you're working somewhere and Jake got fired because he was stealing money from the company. Hopefully there's no Jake here. I almost said John because it's the most common name. Beatrice, she got caught stealing money, and what do we say? They are transitioning. They're finding a new opportunity. No. Beatrice and her dirty money fingers stole from the company. But I think on a more serious way, we don't call them funerals anymore. We call them celebrations of life. And you know what? It's not true. It's a celebration of life on the other side of heaven for them. But it's not a celebration of life for us. It's the pain of sin and death. And I think we're too quick. Are they rejoicing? Yeah. Are they in a better place? Yeah. Are we? No. Not when you lose that mother or that brother or that sister or that child. You're not in a better spot. And so what toxic positivity says is, yeah, but celebrate the life. They're better. And I know I've had some conversations with some of you and in tears gone, I know this happened 6 weeks ago. I should be over it. And no, because when you have a deep love of somebody, you don't just get over it. It doesn't just, well, they're in a better place. That's true. But both can exist, that you can be grieving and in pain, and you can also go, yes, they are in a better place. Thank God for that. But I'm not in this moment. And what we do is we end up passing over it. But it doesn't pass over inside us. And this is not about erasing faith. Because here is what makes, I think, Christianity so tangible. It's not that we pretend we are on the mountain when we're in the valley. It's that we open up our eyes when we're out in the valley. And what do we see? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. It doesn't say the table's on the mountain. It says the table is within the pain, within the challenge, within the grief, within the lament. God is there. He set the table, and he's not leaving you. The other response we make, if it's not toxic positivity, is rage. And so we look for an enemy. We look for a villain. And this is done on micro levels, right? We identify with certain teams. There are better days ahead for us. And we, don't identify with, say, FSU. Now that's, wait. But that's friendly banner, right? It's like, this is my team, my tribe, my crew, and then there's all the garnet and gold folks over there, right? And there's nothing wrong with that because that's just more of a playful team. But then as we, go different layers, we have the separation of families. My youngest, we were with my aunt and uncle up in Asheville, and we're all sitting at the dinner table. She's probably like 4 at this point, and she looks at my aunt, and she goes, "We're the Vales. Who are you?" Which is funny because my aunt was a veil at one point, and then she got married, and now she's not a veil. But we do that as family groups. We do that in a lot of other ways at work, but we also do that at more serious levels, whether it is conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican, or we in past race. I mean, we can go down the line of ones that it's not the playful FSU UF. We have actually made a villain. And the reason why is because when tragedy happens to us, that response of somebody has to either pay or be recognized as the culprit. We don't want to allow pain just to be pain. We don't want to allow the fact that sometimes, because we're in church, I won't use the word I'm thinking, crappy things happen to us. And it sucks. And it's horrible. And it's easy to find a villain because then I have someone to cast my rage on, whether it's a person, a people group, but that doesn't do anything for us. But mentally it goes, I was able to kind of cast this off. They didn't get the best of me. Neither response is in the Bible. The Bible offers a radical alternative. It says to lament. See, God has designed your body in a very unique and interesting way. And when you suppress pain, when you suppress grief, your brain and your body still carries the weight of the unprocessed trauma. And when we don't deal with unprocessed grief, here's what happens to our brain. So the amygdala, which is think of it as like your warning system, it's the fight and flight, and it's important. Like if you step out here and there's a real gator, not this kind of gator, that's gonna kick on, right? And for some of you, you're like, I've been waiting for this. But for those of us who are not raised in the South, like me and PJ, we're like, fight. We're not fighting, we're flight. We're out of here. That kicks in. That's good. Like you need that and don't worry, that's not going to be a trick out there. There's no alligator. You need that. That's important. But the problem is when pain isn't processed through, when we don't lament, the brain never got the signal to turn it off. That it's already been named. It's already been faced. It's already been integrated, but the warning light stays on. And then in our prefrontal cortex, which helps us really regulate our emotional responses, when we chronically suppress pain, that's the tool that calms the amygdala. And when we suppress, one or two things happen. We either fall into the camp where we end up with emotional flooding, or we end up on this side, which is shut down. And sometimes we end up in both, but in most cases, you probably have one of those responses. And it's because our brain was meant to work in sync together, and it can't just hold on to all this grief. And this even affects the way our brain stores long-term storage. Because when we have prolonged stress, when we haven't lamented, what begins to happen is that long-term storage begins to shrink under stress, which is why when we suppress pain and something triggers it, whatever small thing that is, it feels as if we relived it in its rawest form. And it's because that memory is stuck. We haven't moved on from it. And when we have years and years that we've just suppressed whatever pain that was, over time, it becomes a lot harder to get emotionally healthy. And if you've gone to therapy later in life, you open up those doors and all of a sudden you're like, I didn't realize the demons in there were working out and they're on steroids. Yeah. Because the pain wasn't processed. It just gets stronger and more intertwined in you. Not that you can't find healing from it, but as we allow it to grow, it grows. And then in our bodies, when we suppress pain, what happens is that we are constantly shooting cortisol and adrenaline into our bodies. And over time, we're just dysregulated. We can't get emotionally healthy. But here's what lamenting does. It actually activates our vagus nerve system and allows us to process the pain and calm the body. So here's the big idea. God wired you in a way to lament, to putting pain into words, into tears, into prayer. It's allowing the brain to integrate that experience. And you know who's really, really good at this? Babies. Because they haven't been conditioned not to do it. Or even little kids, Have you ever noticed, like, I got two daughters, it doesn't take a whole lot, for them to get stirred up. And when they do, and it's a wild experience, they, in tears, all of a sudden they're fine. Now, I'm not. I'm like, oh, I'm not fine, but they are. Why? Because they're processing through. It's escaping. It's leaving them. Because when we don't lament, we don't have our pain vanish. It burrows into the body and it rewires the brain towards chronic stress and disconnection. But then we come to the beauty of the Psalms. The Psalms are the most emotional of all the books in the Bible. And they teach us how to pray, how to worship, how to rejoice. But the main thing the Psalms teach us to do is to lament. By far, the largest subgenre in the Psalms is lament Psalms. 40% of the Psalms we read are actually Psalms of lament, which means you are meant to lament, not to rage or to fall into toxic positivity. And so this morning, we're going to look at a Psalm of lament. We're going to go to Psalm 13. And this is where we're going to camp for the rest of this morning. And so what I want to do is I'm going to read this psalm, give the context, and then we're going to walk through it. And the reason I chose Psalm 13 is because a lot of these Psalms of David has a lot of Psalms of lament. A lot of them, they give a very specific situation. So David was on the run from Saul. David was hiding from Absalom. David was fill in the blank. Psalms 13, while it is a Psalm of David, we don't know the context. And I chose that because what we do see is he's in a season of prolonged pain. He feels abandoned by God. He feels forgotten, left to deal with enemies who on the surface seem to be winning. Here's the backdrop of Psalm 13. God is silent. And maybe deep down, that's how you feel right now. God, where are you in this scenario of my life? Why have you been silent for so long? So let's read through this psalm, Psalm 13. It says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day? How long shall my enemies be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I'm shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." So here's the structure. The first thing we see in verses 1 and 2 is we find the complaint. This is David. He is bringing what he is feeling to God. And if we were to go through other Psalms, like what I appreciate about David is no matter how dramatic I've ever been about something, David's like, hold my wine goblet. Because he lays it out, right? I mean, he lays it out in desperate form. And sometimes you read it, you're like, seems a little dramatic. But is it? Or is it actually wrestling with how you feel in that moment of releasing all the pain, all the pressure, all the anxiety, all the weight that you're carrying? And so when David complains, and again, we only have these Psalms. I'd like to know if there are the more explicit, unedited ones that he probably wrote as well, that he's like, that probably shouldn't go into the Psalter. I'll keep those to myself. But what is he doing? He's real. Because here's the reality. God already knows. If you're angry at God, tell him. I've been angry at God. I've cursed God out. And guess what? I wasn't struck by lightning. Not yet, at least. But God's like, I knew that was already in there. Because God's not afraid of that. He's not needing your approval, but he needs your honesty if you want to get healed. So David, in his complaints, he is brutally honest. But then notice he doesn't just complain, he moves to petition. He moves to, there starts to be this remembrance, I know who you are. You're Yahweh. I don't question that. And if you listen to a lot of his petitions, it's going, you're going to do what you do because you're the King of the Kings. You're the ruler of the universe. He's declaring that. And then notice it moves into trust and praise. And not all of the lament psalms are like this, but the majority are, where it's the complaint, it is getting brutally honest, it's reminding yourself who God is, and then it's trusting and praising what he's going to do. So going into our psalm, it opens up in these first two verses, there is this repeated refrain. 4 times we hear, how long? How long? That David is getting weary in the delay. And he's not just complaining about the pain, he's complaining and he's laying out the prolonged silence. Which if you've ever gone through what some Christian leaders in the past, they call a dark night of the soul, where it doesn't seem like it matters how much I pray, am in the Word, I feel nothing. And I've had a couple of those bouts, and not more than I think a year was the longest one, and it's brutal. Because the pain is one thing to tolerate, but God's silence feels deafening. And that's where David is at here. He is saying, like, I can't handle this prolonged silence that I'm having to sit in. And then he's recalling. He says, going on, how long will you hide your face from me? And that's a deeply theological and covenantal statement. He is recalling Numbers 6:25, that God's face shining is a sign of blessing, a sign that I am with you. And right now, here's how David feels. He feels like he is cut off from God's covenantal favor, which is far worse than any external threat. And so in this psalm, what David is really, we're going to find wrestling with, is not so much the enemies that are at his doorstep. He's wrestling with, God, why haven't you showed up? I don't have a question about them necessarily. It's why haven't you shined your face upon me? And verse 2 is going to continue, and it's going to declare the psalmist is experiencing the internal conflict that he's wrestling with. Where is God? But then that's the outer defeat. That my soul has no rest, that the enemy is exalting itself. The enemy is, how long will the enemy dominate me? What he's referring to is the central piece of the ancient Near East was always about honor and shame. Now, we don't typically live in as much in an honor and shame culture today. Ours is more of an achievement, a culture. Look at all the things I have. I got a 3-car garage. I don't. Look at all this stuff. Look what I've accomplished. Look at all these degrees, fill in blank. But that wasn't it in the ancient Near East. It was all about honor and shame. And so for David right now, the very core thing of his culture is under attack. The core thing that I wouldn't want anyone, you could touch all these things, but don't mess with the honor. Right now, David is saying, how long are you going to let, and we're going to find out sooner, not just my honor, but your honor, O God, be dominated and felt. And then we get to verse 3. And there's a really important line here. And it says, give light to my eyes. Now, in Hebrew culture, bright eyes were a sign of vitality, a sign of health, a sign of life. Dim eyes were a sign of weakness, exhaustion, and often almost death. And we can find this throughout the Old Testament. In 1 Samuel, Jonathan is exhausted from battle. Jonathan was one of David's closest friends. And what does it say? It says he eats honey and his eyes were brightened. Not that his eyes actually brightened. It just means that he had his strength, he had his energy, he had his vitality restored. Ezra, it says, God has given us a little reviving to set up the house of our God. And then notice, give us a little reviving to brighten our eyes, meaning renewal and restoration. So David is at a point where he feels like God has turned away, That how long will you hide my face from me? Right, that was the first part. But then when will you light up my eyes? It's really David saying, God, I'm pleading with you. Will you turn your face back to me? He's not just saying, help me feel better about this scenario. What he's really saying is, if you don't act, I will die. And sometimes a mistake we make when we're wrestling with grief is we think once we feel better, it must be better. But that emotion is fleeting. David's not looking for just an emotional pick-me-up. He's not looking for, I feel a little more peace, so this must be good. He's going, no, God, I want to wrestle it through, because the real thing I'm feeling right now is not the pain that's been done to me, it's where are you? And when will you show up? And when will you shine your face upon me and my eyes be lit up? It's far deeper than chasing an emotional feeling. That's not what he's doing here. He's saying, God, renew my vision of you and shine your vision upon me. And then it continues in verse 4, where we go back to that shame culture of being shaken and mocked. And when it says that, it's saying that, God, what is going on right now is humiliating for the whole community. The enemy's triumph would almost be read as this kind of like divine abandonment. Where are you? And so what does David do? As notice we're switching into this next stage. We're out of necessarily the complaint. And now he is saying, God, you need to show up. Not just for me, but because of your justice, because of who you are. This needs to be God's public vindication. And notice what he's doing here. He's not just focusing on make me feel better, make me feel right, but God, it is also your honor that is under attack. It is your glory that they are trying to diminish. Now, is he reminding God because God forgot? Your point, David. I guess that's true. They are doing that. No, he's reminding himself of what is at the center. Because David knows, I've taken my eyes off of God. I've taken my eyes off of who he is. And so I'm reminding myself in this that God, what they are doing right now isn't just about the pain I feel. It is coming against your glory and your name. And then in verse 4, it goes back to, again, the shame culture. In verse 5, I love this line by Charles Spurgeon. He was a preacher from the 19th century. He says this, the psalmist's eyes are wet with tears, yet his lips are trembling with song. And we get that because as we're moving through those first few verses, you can almost feel how David would have felt. I feel alone. I feel stuck. I feel like this isn't going to change. And then there's a little bit of hope that's brought. But how often in those moments of lament have you found yourself just weeping in tears, but you're declaring the goodness of God? You don't feel it. I don't feel the goodness of God. I can't even see it because I'm all blurry and snot nose and all of it. But I'm going, God, I will see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I don't feel that right now, but I'm declaring who you are over my life. And that is what David is doing here, right? He is emotionally broken, right? He's a mess, but he's saying, God, I'm still with trembling lips going to declare who you are. And so after 4 anguishing how longs, the mood suddenly shifts. But notice, nothing in his circumstances have changed. Circumstances are exactly the same as it started. But what has changed is his perspective. It's David deciding, I'm going to cling to God's covenant love. He is reminding himself that God does not go back on his word. He is reminding himself that God does not change while we might change. I'm going to cling. I'm going to hold on to God's covenant love. But then notice, I think, something very interesting in the final verse, verse 6. He doesn't end with a request. He ends with worship. And I think this is something that's a little bit different about how Christians grieve, about how Christians lament. That David doesn't end with, here's the 3-step process for what I'm going to do now. He doesn't end, also demanding God of anything. He just ends going, I will raise my hands and I will worship the one who is worthy of all praise. His perspective is reoriented. He has brought it to God. He has lamented. He has laid it down. But the commencement isn't a list, isn't a request, isn't what he's going to do differently now in light of that. It is to sing. It is to declare, I'm going to live under the banner of my Creator, of my God. And that's what Christian lament is meant to do. When we say lament, it's not that we're just verbally laying it all out there and just letting it sit, but that there's this process with God, that God is the good and perfect Father. An earthly father, when my daughters slip by the pool, the first reaction isn't, that's what you get for running. It's, come over here. Let me hold you. You all right? You need a Band-Aid even though you're not bleeding? It's okay. Let's just slow down, right? That's what the Father does. When we are broken, he's like, come over here. Let me hold you. Are you bleeding? Do you need a Band-Aid? You're not alone. So lament as a Christian is meant to move us through grief. It's not the rush through it. It's not to pretend it's not there. And I think what a lot of us probably tend to do is we go from, I feel the pain, and we jump to praise. But that's not Christian maturity. Christian maturity is, no, I'm actually going to lament. I'm going to complain, bring it to God. I'm then going to petition and trust, and then I will end in praise. Because you can't really get to true praise without walking the path of lament, without walking the stony path, without walking and seeing the pain, seeing the regret, seeing the whatever it is that you're trying to wrestle with. But when I have done that and I bring it to God, I can then worship and say, God, you walked with me through every step of that path. I will declare who you are. And as Christians, Jesus repeatedly, when he's asked, what are the deep things of God? It's two things. And love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind, and love others. Over and over and over again. Well, those who lament well, love well. Because if I don't lament my pain, my grief, my sorrow, that will become the lens through which I view everyone else. But if I learn to lament well, I'm going to learn to love well. So this morning, as we've had to walk through things at a national level that are wrong and painful and discouraging and that fill us with a little bit of what now, and that we also have personal ones. It's hard enough just to walk through the personal ones, much less have these things that just feel like they just topple on top of us. What God does is he invites us to lament. And here's one of the best things about the psalm. You don't need a pastor to do that with you. You don't need a therapist. While those are both fine, you actually have psalms of lament given to you right here that can just be used. It could be Psalm 13. Here's the change, though. Instead of David, it's me. Instead of in David's situation, it's my situation. It literally is laid out there. That the great therapist is your Father who wants to bring healing to every single part of your life. You're not alone. In the grief, in the pain, you're not alone. And when you learn to lament well, you love well.